And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by ABSA CIB, honoured by the 2025 Salter Awards. Good evening. Welcome to the programme. I'm Stephen Grootes. It is, of course, entirely appropriate that we will be discussing the price of chocolate tonight. May well be leaving a bitter taste in your mouth. But if you go and just look at the price of Easter eggs in most places, it is utterly astronomical. And there are reasons why this is happening. Part of it, I think, is to do with weather, with where the raw materials are made and grown and all the rest. But also, if you look at that and the price of coffee at the moment, it really tells you something about the impact of changes in the weather and what that means for things that we've become so used to over the years. I mean, a big part of life, chocolate and coffee. A couple of things that are not habit-forming. They're not alcoholic. They don't have anything really bad in them apart from sort of sugar and calories. And coffee really doesn't have very much that's bad for you at all, depending on how your body tolerates caffeine. It is just a reminder of how nature will affect you economically should she choose to. Talking of she's, of course, the Easter Bunny is the one that really battles over the next little while, as your children might find out, I'm afraid, on Sunday. I've been thinking a little bit about the Finance Minister, Godongwana. And I mean, on one level, I have a lot of sympathy for him in this position. I mean, for years, a finance minister has had to sort of deal with the problems everyone else has created, right? And kind of almost be the sort of chief prefect, or adult in the room. I think we could probably say that. Have to make the difficult trade-offs. I do still, though, kind of want to say, and I haven't seen the minister or spoken to him since the start of this budget problem, but to sort of say, did you really think 2% was going to fly? I mean, did you really think? I still sort of shake my head a little bit at that. I find it really quite strange, quite a bizarre sort of thing that he thought that this would work. Well, we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a couple of moments, actually. Interesting news from the US President Donald Trump saying on Truth Social today, his social media network, and by his, I do mean his, saying that he wants Jerome Powell, the chair of the US Federal Reserve, actually out of office. He wants the US Fed to lower interest rates. And I can't help but feel that, Trump's policy seems to be, it's a strategy, push everything everywhere all the time, make other people react. That's sort of what he's doing. It's incredibly aggressive. It's incredibly nasty, actually. But all of that in the longer run, what that means for the US economy, if you were to do something like that, just remove someone from an independent position. I mean, we all know what would happen if, for example, a president here tried to remove the governor of the Reserve Bank and what that would mean. And thankfully, touch wood, it's never happened. But I'm reminded about that sort of comment that you see from European officials that the United States is resembling an emerging market, by which people, I think, mean, with a slight hint of something, perhaps malice or insult, that you're behaving in a very unpredictable fashion, that you're actually behaving incredibly badly and in a very volatile fashion. I mean, it does add to that, doesn't it? And may well be responsible for the fact that the dollar is in a period in which it does seem to be declining. Well, good to hear from you tonight. 011 883 0702 021 446 0567. And of course, voice notes this evening on 072 702 1702.
702. Stephen is on The Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
Well, the Finance Minister, Godongwana, saying in court papers, under oath then, that he believes the VAT increase will come into effect on the 1st of May, 13 days from now. That's despite the intense opposition to it. He also says there's no other way to raise the revenue that would be raised through the 0.5 percentage point VAT increase. But also reports over the last few days, look, we know that almost all political parties are against it, which means that the ANC becomes the sort of key factor here, and some suggestions, in fact, that the ANC may no longer support an increase in VAT. Sam Mkokeli is a business Times columnist and politics researcher. Sam, good evening. There are many moving parts to this. There's the legal case brought by the DA and the EF. That's what the minister was responding to today. There's the parliamentary timetable. There is the VAT increase itself. And then there is the politics. Do you think the minister is right? Is this VAT increase really going to happen in 13 days' time?
Good afternoon, good evening, Stephen, and your audience, and thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, I think from a practical reality, it's highly likely that the VAT kicks in, the VAT new rate kicks in on May 1. Looking at the law as it's being read out and understood by the minister, and this is how it's been seen in previous years. That's the first part. The second part is just the practical reality of finding cards. And I hear all these MPs talking about money can be found here and there. It's such a hard thing for the decision makers to take the decision. Nobody wants to cut. I remember when SAA needed to be saved 4 or 5 years ago, it needed about 10 billion rands or 14 billion rands. It was so hard to find money for it, to move money around. It's almost impossible at the end of the day. So in law, this is how the Treasury reads the law. The government is allowed, finance ministry sees it in that way. That's the first part. And the second one is just the parliamentary process itself. I mean, it doesn't block the VAT kicking in, and it's going to take a while. But that's the political reality around what these MPs are trying to do. It is so complex. I don't think they have comprehended exactly. When they confuse the revenue line and the spending lines, when they use them interchangeably, it's quite a joke, quite frankly. When you look at the report of the Standing Committee that it was the basis of the discussion around the fiscal framework. It's so wishy-washy. I'm just surprised that it went through with a big hole as to where the 13 billion rand is to come from. But I don't know if that's quite part of what the DA wants in court. So there's that element as well. But all these things are muddled. You find the political arguments getting in where the legal arguments ought to be, the economics arguments getting in. The governments are allowed to take bad decisions. Then that's a political matter. And then the citizens must deal with that politically. That's the one aspect of it. But then there's the economic reality, Stephen. You asked the question whether 2 percentage points was ever going to fly. So what the finance minister is dealing with here is fiscal consolidation and need to consolidate our public finances right now. Public debt is out of control. Debt service costs are quite high. So what we will find here is that we're going to spend 8 months or so debating this VAT thing, 0.5 percentage points. And what we're going to see is that the bond prices will be affected. That's the rate that the government pays to get money from institutions. So eventually we will pay the price 2 times. We're going to have uncertainty around this thing. It's going to affect the rand. It's going to be a long, drawn-out process over 0.5 percentage point. We don't like it. It's a bad thing. But sometimes politics is such a complex a topic. It needs a maturity. It needs grown-up people to decide that this is something to get on with, take a decision now, and there are bigger things to do.
I mean, if the ANC top leadership were to decide tomorrow we don't want a VAT increase, I mean, what happens then? I mean, I can't imagine the mess. The legal and parliamentary process will kind of have to continue. You'd have all parties voting against it at some point.
Yeah, it would be messy. I mean, people would run around. But ultimately, what's happened here, Stephen, is the Treasury used to drive policy since the beginning. The Trevor Manuel days, Pravin Gordhan at the time, it was very central. What you're seeing here is just really a battle, a very clumsy battle for the control over economic policy. And if it carries on like this, the Treasury will just become the bean counters or the bookkeepers, and it need to lose its credibility, and they're losing that space to a parliament that has no clue how to handle issues of this nature and what its power is. So we'll end up with a very weak institution, and it will be very hard for people who look at investment, where to put money, where to buy bonds, and they would find it very hard to figure out what's next, and there will not be won't be able to be a certainty. What we need really is the President, Cyril Ramaphosa, to stand up and say, here's what my preference is around this thing. Get the GNU to sit around the table, say, guys, this is my political capital, I'm going to use it, and I want you guys to support this. Here's what you get in return. Let's just move on. There's a country to lead.
It's interesting, actually. He's been curiously quiet about all of this, hasn't he? Sam Mkokeli, thank you. Business Times columnist and politics researcher. Dr Azar Jammine is Director and Chief Economist at Econometrix. Azar, good evening to you, and thank you for your time ahead of a long weekend. One of the points Godongwana makes in his legal documents is that there's no other way to raise the money that a VAT increase would raise. And as Sam Mkokeli reminds us, so many politicians have said you could do X, you could do Y. But in real terms, is Godongwana right?
I suppose he's correct in terms of the ease with which he can be sure of raising additional money. But the big issue is not whether he can raise additional money or whether VAT is the right way to go. The real issue is, could the government not have found other areas to save money so as not to have to increase the rate of VAT? That's the first thing. The second thing is the amount of additional revenue that's going to be raised by this 0.5% rate of VAT is actually relatively small. I know 13.5 billion rand sounds like a lot of money, but in the context of the entire budget, at 0.5% of it, the question arises, surely, similarly, you could have found 0.5% across the whole budget to trim a bit of spending here and there. And the concern of citizens is, we're paying for the ills of corruption and state capture over so many years. Now, are they responsible? Must they be responsible for paying for that? We hear nothing or very little about fighting corruption and actually bringing people to book who are being accused of corrupt practices over many, many years. And now suddenly we have this 13.5 billion rand, which, as I say, is really not a big thing. And it's really having a massive influence on the political environment in South Africa when we're really dealing with a fairly small issue. For that matter, the extension of the social relief of distress grant for one additional year comes to 35 billion rand, so much more than the 0.5% VAT increase. The extension of the public sector wage bill to satisfy the trade unions is another 23.5 billion rand, almost double the amount that's going to be raised by the 0.5% rate of VAT. And that's why I'm finding it very difficult to come to grips with, why this is a politically fraught discussion. It's really not a big economic discussion.
Do you agree with Sam Mkokeli that the National Treasury, it seems to me the National Treasury, the prestige, perhaps even the independence it used to have all been affected by this?
Oh, without a doubt that this is the case, but there has been a move within the ANC and certain factions over many years, starting with the Zuma regime, to diminish the power of the Treasury and to try and centralize the power of decision-making in financial matters in the hands of the politicians rather than the Treasury itself.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr Azar Jammine, Director, Chief Economist at Econometrix.
The Money Show on 702.
Monday to Friday, 6 to 8 p.m.
So I don't know if you are someone who receives Easter eggs by bunny delivery or if you're someone who maybe plays the Easter bunny in your house. But if you've been looking at the price of Easter eggs, it is just unbelievable. It is astronomical. Chocolate prices have literally gone through the roof. You'd need some sort of bunny magic to really afford them. Anthony Gerd is the co-founder and director at Honest Chocolate. Anthony, good evening. I don't know if you have a line to the Easter bunny. I suspect you may. Why is chocolate so expensive? Why are Easter eggs so expensive this year compared to really what we've seen in the past?
Hi there. Yeah, well, I've been talking to the Easter Bunny every day for the last year, looking at the graph of the cocoa bean prices, and that's where it comes from. We've had a huge surge in prices over the last year and a half due to the lack of beans available in West Africa, mostly due to weather patterns, bad weather. So, yeah.
What has been the change in the weather? Is it too hot? Is there too much rain? Has it been some kind of climate event? Or has it just been, and this does happen long before climate change, you would just get variable weather?
You would, but this is unprecedented. By far the worst ever, and they're saying climate change. So lack of rain for seasons and then too much rain. And then a lot of the trees have got like shoot rot, which kills the tree. Too much rain and then too little rain. So there's no balance that there used to be. There is a bit of recovery at the moment and hoping for more rain at the right times. But that has basically meant that a lot of trees have died, and there's been a lack of cocoa beans, and then obviously lack of supply, price goes up. And I'm sure a lot of market manipulation, some traders have been on top of that in the commodity markets. Yeah.
Okay, so there might be some relief in store. How long before we know? I presume it takes a little while to grow a tree to the point where it can start to produce these beans.
Yeah, absolutely. This is about 3 years, and they are replanting. But even the trees that they've got currently, they harvest twice a year, and they apparently there's a bit more rain, but they're not quite sure how the harvest will happen this half of the year. But yeah, I think the big word is ambiguity. The price has gone up and down, mostly up, and it's come down and gone up again over the last year. But I think from 2023. From 23 to last year, the price went up about 600 to 800% actually, 600%. Yeah, and now it's dropped to about 350% higher than it was 3 years ago on the market price.
It's an astonishing impact. The chocolate industry around the world is huge. Are there other parts of the world where cocoa could be grown instead, where supplies could come from other places?
Yeah, absolutely. At Honest Chocolate, we get our beans directly from the farmers in Tanzania, for example. So they're unaffected by those weather patterns, but the market price has gone up so much because of the demand. Because Ivory Coast and Ghana supply about 60% of the world's cocoa, it's really concentrated in that area, the bulk cocoa. But yeah, Central America, Indonesia, a lot of cocoa there, but it's just the main sources from West Africa.
I would presume that someone somewhere is going to be investing in growing more in another part of the world. There's be a good opportunity for someone.
Absolutely. We're speaking to people who are growing a bit more in Uganda. We've just heard of guys who are resurrecting the cacao trees in northern Angola, actually, which we've never heard of before. So we're excited for that. So we hope, in a few years' time, it'll balance out. We've at Honest Chocolate, we've just paid 130% more for our same consignment of beans as last year. We already paid more than double market price because of the ethical, direct source and the organic part of it. But it's quite crazy.
I realize chocolate has a particular definition, and I don't need to be reminded about chocolate's connection to a pleasure center in someone's brain. But I would imagine the hunt might be on at these prices. The hunt will be on for substitutes. So if what I was told when I was young is true, the Italians developed Nutella, the chocolate type of spread that you get on bread. They've developed that instead of chocolate. It comes from hazelnuts, rather. People will be looking for substitutes. The sweet industry, as I say, it's massive, will be looking for something that has a chocolate type impact that can be advertised, marketed, packaged as like chocolate, and will try and make some money from that instead.
Yeah, absolutely. They've already made chocolate substitute products, derived from I don't know, I suppose chemicals or something, where they're trying to make essentially fake chocolate, taste like chocolate. But I think the mouthfeel is always going to be slightly different. And I think that, your very cheap Easter eggs and confectionery that has actually very little cocoa content in it. Those will still remain fairly cheap. It's just when you get to the higher percentages, like the 70% chocolates or the darker chocolates, where the actual cocoa percentage is quite high. And that's where, unfortunately, the price will go up.
Anthony Gerd, thanks very much indeed. Co-founder, director at Honest Chocolate.
The Money Show.
The Markets.
Rudy van der Merwe is not the Easter Bunny, but he is the portfolio manager at AdviceWorks. Rudy, good evening. To do a little bit of corporate news ahead of the long weekend, not a lot, but Sasol putting up an update and talking about how they'll reduce the amount of coal they're producing themselves.
Evening, Stephen. Yeah, a bit of an update from Sasol. They're in a bit of an unfortunate position. They're not in a really favoured industry at the moment, and they're subject to unpredictable commodity prices and the like. So not an easy space to be in. Some of what they're doing seems to be making progress. Certainly their safety record has improved very materially, and they've had a couple of successive quarters now of no fatalities, which I think is obviously positive news. They are having some issues with volumes, specifically at Secunda. To some extent, that's being offset with higher chemical prices elsewhere, so their guidance actually seems to be largely unchanged, but they are still having too much stoppages, and that is something they need to attend to. But it does seem like they've steadied the ship. They've been through a tough couple of years. Some capital was seemingly quite significantly misallocated, and they had to get rid of some of their offshore investments. But it seems like it is a more stable environment just at the moment, and hopefully they can keep it on an even keel now.
Talking of stable environments, Trump's social media post this morning about Jerome Powell suggesting he wants him out as quickly as possible. Hard to know exactly what he means by that.
Well, yeah, it isn't very clear, but I don't think that there's really a suggestion that there'll be that there's any intention of early termination. There's been talk for some time that his actual term is up in May 2026, and they've been scouting around as to who the most appropriate people would be to appoint to that position. The fact that they may or may not get along particularly well possibly has ended up in the statement coming across more aggressively than is useful. But yeah, certainly my understanding is that this is just part of the normal process of the next guy getting appointed in May next year. And that, the process typically is, I think, rational. There's lots of people involved in that. I think they're certainly aware of some of the disruption that's been caused by rash statements and changes in policy over the last while. So hopefully one gets a rational appointment who may well be better than Powell for all we know. So there's clearly been a lot of disruption in the last while with uncertainty around policy. And it's not so much whether policy is good or bad. Markets can deal with bad policy as long as that is consistent. So if we get a bad set of rules, then you can make decisions as to how much do I produce and how much do I sell, and what is the price going to be that I need to charge to overcome my hurdles, and people can adapt to that. But consistently changing the rules of the game in a haphazard fashion is not particularly helpful, and markets don't enjoy that at all.
I mean, talking of all of that, there were hints yesterday from the World Trade Organization that we are going to see less economic activity as a result of the Trump tariffs. But also, I imagine just the uncertainty. Yes, there's a 90-day pause. No one really knows what's going to happen after that. And there's still 10% tariffs into the US right now.
Yeah, so one hopes that this sort of pause that's on at the moment results in a more considered approach thereafter, saying that we've thought this through, and actually we're going to adjust it to the following set of rules, and this is how they're going to be applied, and this will not be further meddled with, and that's then a sensible set of rules, that we don't have to keep chopping and changing to. And it's really the chopping and changing that's the problem, and that makes it very difficult to adapt and for the world to make decisions. And it results in massive volatility in markets. We every now and then see a massive celebration that the markets have rebounded, but if the markets went down significantly the day before, it means somebody burnt their fingers there and somebody burnt their fingers on the way up again, and that means that people start withdrawing from participating in that environment, which obviously isn't good. So hopefully, sound minds prevail, and then they come back with a more rational way forward.
Rudy van der Merwe, thanks very much indeed. Portfolio manager at Advice Works. You're at The Money Show, bringing the time now to 6:30.
The Money Show
With Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app.
and DSTV channel 856.
Well, good to hear from you this evening. 011-883-0702 021-446-0567. I don't know if you've had to cut back on the amount of chocolate in your household this year simply because the price is just so astronomical. May well be one of the things. I think chocolate substitutes are going to be the next big thing. We'll see a lot more of those over the next little while. An interesting wrinkle developing in the debate around whether South Africa should allow Elon Musk's Starlink service to operate here. The communications regulator receiving the views of what would be the competitors to Starlink. One of those, of course, is Vodacom. Vodacom has said that Starlink should be subject to the same laws around black economic empowerment as everyone else. And that, I presume, would mean that 30% of Starlink, or Starlink South Africa, if it went that way, would have to be owned by black people. Jan Vermeulen is the editor at mybroadband.co.za. Jan, good evening. I mean, the whole issue of BE and Starlink, incredibly contentious. I presume Vodacom are motivated by their own self-interest here. Are they really just asking for a level playing field, or is there something else going on?
Good evening. Yeah, so there's two parts to this. So the one part is them asking for a level playing field, and they're not alone in that. And I don't think Vodacom cares one way or the other about BE, except to maybe placate their PIC shareholders. But to them, it's to make sure that they don't operate at a disadvantage to an overseas operator, similar to how broadcasters have been complaining about the fact that streamers like Netflix don't need the same broadcasting license to offer their services in South Africa. But there's a separate part to Vodacom's submission to ICASA that was particularly interesting, and that's that they submitted to ICASA that the regulator should put up guardrails when it comes to direct-to-device services in South Africa, to essentially force operators like Starlink to come to commercial arrangements with terrestrial operators like themselves before they can offer direct-to-device communication services. And direct-to-device is where the satellite services speak directly to what might be a regular smartphone. And so, there's two parts to this. And the one, they're blatantly asking for protectionism.
I mean, that's astonishing. I can't see why someone like why someone like Starlink would give in to that. So if I'm a South African and I have a cell phone that is Starlink capable, why should Vodacom or anyone else have anything to do with it? Would surely be the argument.
Indeed. So if let's say let's go through the whole thought process. Let's say Starlink sets aside its particular aversion to BEE and 30% local ownership laws, and goes and either partners with someone locally or gets a BEE partner in with its PTY limited here in South Africa, and it gets the spectrum licenses that it needs to operate the service, and it operates on completely separate spectrum to what Vodacom and everybody else uses. So that's like a separate issue. Is obviously if the satellite operator wants to use regular cell phone spectrum, and then it would have to enter into some kind of commercial arrangement with the operators on the ground to use their spectrum, or some other kind of deal needs to be hatched. But if they have their whole own spectrum to operate on, then absolutely, it should not involve the local operators at all.
For most of us, Vodacom, if you have Vodacom, would provide mobile internet. It has a fiber operation as well as got big plans for a much bigger fiber operation. But is Starlink's service really competing with what Vodacom does now?
Not yet. And so this was what interested me as I read through these submissions with new eyes, is the operators, when we've asked them about the threat that Starlink poses, they've kind of poo-pooed it. They said, no, they don't have any indoor penetration. They're good for filling in rural coverage. And so, they're a complementary service. But this, to me, shows that they do regard Starlink as some threat. Perhaps not today, but in future. And so and certainly Starlink could be a threat to their business in more remote areas, provided that Starlink can provide a better, cheaper service. Because obviously Starlink, right now, the way these satellite services work is you need line of sight to the sky. It doesn't work otherwise. But perhaps in future, there would be a way for them to not need that. We'll see. Technology is always a moving target.
I mean, Lesotho this week has signed a deal with Starlink, and as I understand it, they basically had to suspend their equivalent of BEE. Some people in that society, I think, are quite frustrated by that. I did wonder if Lesotho does it in any way increase the pressure on us? I mean, you wouldn't think so. It does make us stand out a little bit more, let me put it like that.
Indeed. So I don't know that it puts pressure on the people in South Africa who are wholly opposed to Starlink coming here. Like each country's pressures are different. So Lesotho's particular situation, if I was, reading, based on the reports from the wires, is that 70% of Lesotho's economy is exports to South Africa, and 20% of it is exports to the US. So you're talking about thousands of Basotho jobs on the line if they don't make nice with the United States. And part of that, I think, was showing, we'll open up to U.S. investment. But yes, I think people are understandably upset that there seems to be rules for thee and not for me. And so there's definitely something to be said for, if you're going to scrap the 30% local ownership requirement for telecommunications operators, it needs to be across the board. But I think this was something that had to happen quickly, and we'll see what the fallout in Lesotho is going to be over time, because I can imagine that Vodacom, who has operations in Lesotho, is not going to be that pleased that they have to comply with certain local requirements, whereas Starlink does not.
Elon Musk, I'm gonna just have to be honest with what's going on, Jan. He's getting frankly weirder. Okay, I mean, there are reports now about his personal life, his what seems to be a desire to have a very large number of children, the financial arrangements he makes to have that happen, and his involvement in US politics. At some point, is this going to have an impact on his businesses? I mean, I realize Tesla's having a difficult time, but that's sort of about market penetration, really. And I understand that. That's pretty obvious to see why Tesla's having a problem. But are you expecting any of the sort of other stuff happening around him to just have an impact on what investors think about whether or not they should be investing money?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And I'm reminded of that movie, The Aviator, which was also based on a true story, where the founder there also started losing his mind. And the thing is, the businesses themselves are strong. So Tesla, entirely separate issue, but SpaceX is just going from strength to strength. And Starlink is years ahead of everyone else. So, if you look at Amazon's Kuiper, that has local partnerships, with our local operators, OneWeb and Lynx and AST Space Mobile, which has a deal with Vodafone, and through Vodafone is Vodacom, and those guys are doing stuff that will eventually compete with Starlink. But the fact is, Starlink is here and now, and it's got this massive early mover advantage. It doesn't seem as though SpaceX's actual operations are impacted. I don't know what their strategy is for sort of insulating themselves from stuff. But, from what we've kind of heard via sources kind of close to all this, like, there are certain things that Elon Musk feels strongly about. His home country is actually kind of one of them. And so when it comes to Tesla launching in South Africa and Starlink launching in South Africa, he might be looking far more closely at South Africa than what his employees might be doing elsewhere in the world, and the deals they're hatching, say, in Zimbabwe or Kenya to make things possible. But here in South Africa, unfortunately, his eye is keenly on what's going on here.
Jan Vermeulen, thank you so much. Editor at mybroadband.co.za.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa CIB, honored by the 2025 Salter Awards.
7 minutes now to 7 the time. Well, you heard yesterday from the alcohol company Heineken that the volume of wine it sold in the first quarter of the year in South Africa was down 20% from the year before. Meanwhile, the US market, I suppose, has kind of effectively closed for our wine producers. There was the introduction of the Trump tariffs. There was this pause, but still in that market, an increase of just 10%, which is the current rate now, surely will have an impact. Are we then expecting a big surplus of wine and maybe cheaper wine on our shelves? Professor Michael Fridjhon is a founder of winewizard.co.za. He's also a visiting professor of wine business at the University of Cape Town. Michael, good evening. Good to have you back on The Money Show. I mean, should we expect more cheaper wine on our shelves as a result of all of this?
Well, Stephen, the sadness is it may be so, because our wineries, certainly at the kind of entry level, are battling to make a living at the prices that we retail wine for. And the wines that are being exported fall into two brackets. To Europe, we export quite a lot of the quite expensive, geeky wines that are equally sought after by South African collectors. To the United States, we export a certain amount of generic wine and a certain amount of, believe it or not, bulk volume. So the net effect of that is that we will lose a business that wasn't that important for us. Much more seriously is what will happen to the European wine trade if it starts battling with Trump's tariffs. And they will therefore then close the door to our wines, and that will have a very big impact on local producers.
No, I mean, I imagine that there will just be more wine available around the world so long as you're outside the United States, and that will then affect everybody.
Yeah, I mean, the world is already, I have to say, slightly awash with wine. The champagne market of the world, real French champagne, has shed more than 20% in the last 2 years before the Trump tariffs. Bordeaux is also down, I think, 20 to 30%. So already these are guys who are looking to do deals. And if in the middle of this, we find ourselves competing with strongly branded European product on European shelves, I fear that the doors will close on many South African producers, and we will then find that surplus brought back to our shelves.
Why is there so much European wine available? I mean, why are they battling to sell some of what they produce?
So it's quite interesting. There's been a declining consumption of wine worldwide for the last at least 10 years. Some of it is attributed to Gen Z and the fact that it drinks on average less wine. I think one of the reasons Gen Z drinks less wine is that it's hugely indebted. It's got college debt. It's come into market at a difficult time. Most of those Gen Zers don't even own their own homes. Many are living with their parents, and wine consumption is not a priority. So the effect of that is that the boomers are drinking less because they are, and because sadly they're dying out, and the new generation coming into the wine market hasn't replaced their consumption.
I imagine it's also quite maybe difficult to market wine to younger people right now. It's quite expensive. There are other ways to do it. The generations that come after my generation, let me put it like that, drink less alcohol anyway. It's just not seen as the thing to do anymore.
Yeah, so there is a swing away from alcohol, and wine is also seen as a very complicated beverage. You need to, or it's believed you need to know a great deal about the arcane rules before you can enjoy it. I don't think that is the case. And I do think that where there will be a huge benefit for South African consumers is that the kind of wines that may get shunted out of the British supermarkets, for lack of another word, are high-quality, entry-level wines, can come back here, will get more promotion because the producers will need to find a way to sell them. You mentioned Heineken. Heineken owns Nederburg. For 100 Rand a bottle, you can buy products like Nederburg Shiraz, which is really a fabulous bottle of Shiraz under a different label. It would sell for more money. So it's almost as if consumers are a bit skeptical about the quality at the price. The same could be said about Douglas Green Chardonnay. I think it sells for less than 100 Rand a bottle. It's finished in the top 10 of the Chardonnay du Monde competition. So the quality is there. The pricing in this market is already quite depressed, and the opportunity for South African consumers who are prepared to put snobbery aside is simply vast.
Are we going to see jobs going in the Western Cape as a result of all of this, just less demand for wine?
I'd like to hope not. The industry is, I mean, it's been through this before with COVID, and it seems to have managed itself quite well. We are seeing an attrition in actual vineyards. So we've lost probably 20% of the national vineyard in the last 20 years. And I guess that means that the vineyard labor that would have worked those vineyards has had to find an alternative employment.
Thank you very much indeed. In very difficult times, it would seem. Professor Michael Fridjhon is, of course, the founder of winewizard.co.za and a visiting professor of wine business at the University of Cape Town, also the founder of WineX. It does just tell you how the world is changing. I mean, it does seem that younger people are drinking less alcohol. Now, that is fundamentally a good thing. We all know the cost of alcohol. I mean, in our country, it may not be happening just yet, but it probably will happen at some point. That does raise questions about economic models, what people will do instead. I think there's kind of a limit on how much alcohol-free beer, frankly, people are going to buy and drink. So a lot to talk about there. Good to hear from you as well on 011 883 0702 and 021 446 0567. You're with The Money Show. It's 7 o'clock.
And now, The Money Show.
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa CIB, honoured by the 2025 Salter Awards. Good evening. Welcome to the second hour of the programme, ahead, of course, of the long weekend. Investment School this evening. We'll be talking about whether or not you should focus on dividends or growth during this period of volatility. And, of course, we all know what's caused it, or who's caused it. But that'll be the main focus. Lots of questions to ask about which stocks you buy, what happens if stocks change, what happens if suddenly a company is caught in the crosshairs. Incredibly likely and possible, in fact, in these moments. We'll talk about NVIDIA and their microchips in just a moment with Siphumelele Zondi. And then don't forget as well, in Small Business Focus, we'll be looking at digitizing township businesses. It really is about the end of cash. And that kind of is what we should be working towards. Will make a big difference, I think, in many, many societies. Bolalani Balabala, we'll be speaking to him in a few moments as well.
The Money Show on 702.
Monday to Friday, 6 to 8 p.m.
Well, I've been thinking a little bit about Elon Musk and some of the issues that he's been involved in. And you heard, we touched on it a little bit earlier with Jan Vermeulen. But some of what he's been doing is, frankly, wacky. I'm talking really about his personal life. You can, I think it was the Wall Street Journal that first carried it. I'm not going to go into too many of the details, but they involve the fact that he wants to have as many children as he can sort of find as humanly possible. And he's finding people who are prepared to transact in that way. The thing is that at some point, I do wonder if the personal behavior of someone who's so single-handedly responsible for so many businesses does affect the value of that business. It's a conversation, I suppose, around the decisions investors make. Now, he's not the only one. There's a book out recently by someone who worked at Facebook, Meta, and was talking about some of the just strangeness. Mark Zuckerberg wanted to sort of be, gently mobbed by fans in South Korea. Another female executive wanted to go to sleep lying on someone's lap while having their hair stroked. I mean, that's just curious behavior. No one knew about it at the time, but in an era where more and more comes out, becomes more and more transparent, at what point do things just become weird and you decide not to invest in a company anymore? It's not a big issue at the moment, but I wonder, with all of the weirdness around, if maybe one day it will become a bit more of an issue.
702.
702.
Stephen is on The Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
Well, lots going on in the artificial intelligence market, and particularly around microchips. NVIDIA's been halted from exporting some microchips to China. This has sort of happened before, but it's happening very quickly. There was a story this week in Reuters suggesting that, in fact, NVIDIA knew this might be coming, but its customers didn't know it might be coming. Siphumelele Zondi is our tech expert. He's on the line now. Siphumelele, good evening. I mean, NVIDIA chips, why are they so specific to artificial intelligence? I realize artificial intelligence has certain requirements, but what's special about the NVIDIA chips, or the chips designed by NVIDIA, that makes them so important to this?
Hello, Stephen. So NVIDIA chips use what's called a GPU and not necessarily a CPU. So GPU has been used quite a lot in gaming. So if you, let's say, have been playing video games since forever and a day, or likeliness since the 1990s, those video games, because of the processors that they have, and they need to be fast and the agility that is needed in the game itself, in all likeliness, you've been using they've been using NVIDIA chips. And what's been found in the last 2 years or so is that those video gaming chips and how fast they actually process information are actually the most suitable for artificial intelligence. And that's how they basically have gotten ahead of everybody, because from being microchips that nobody actually really cared about if they were not in the gaming world, to being very lucrative chips, because you can repurpose from video games into now artificial intelligence, as everything that is going on in the world is largely reliant on AI. I believe that they entered what was called a $1 trillion or a $1 trillion stock market about a year ago or so, because that's how valuable they suddenly became out of being just gaming chips prior to that.
And then obviously the decision by the Trump administration to say they cannot be shipped to China. Is this all about trying to stop China from artificial intelligence? I mean, presumably it's about trying to sort of disrupt the playing field a bit. We seem to have lost Siphumelele Zondi there. That line just dropping. We'll continue that conversation with him in just a moment. And, of course, lots to talk about with this issue. It does sort of raise the question around how a government interferes in kind of global commerce. At the same time, though, if you believe, as Trump clearly does, that he's in a battle with China, well, then this is what you would do. You would sort of do something like that. So, Siphumelele, back with us now. Why did the Trump administration take this decision to stop, to prevent NVIDIA from selling these chips to customers in China?
Yeah, it's not the first time it's being done, right? It's happened before. And this is essentially because of the ongoing trade war, right? Because there is an AI development war between China and the United States of America. We do remember the shock with DeepSeek a couple of months ago, and then that shock created a lot of panic, and there's panic again with basically Donald Trump trying to pick a trade war with everybody in the world, but here with China specifically because of the amount of tech and especially AI development that's been going on in China, and in certain parts being seen to be ahead of the United States of America, with everything becoming AI in the future becoming AI. It seems like a method of halting Chinese AI development. So they rely less, or because they also naturally rely on NVIDIA, right? So they get less of those chips.
There's obviously, China's obviously not sitting on its hands and doing nothing here. We all know that from DeepSeek. They did show an alternative. It's called CUDA, or CUDA. Do we know much about it?
All right. So it's actually an alternative to CUDA. This is Musa, right? So Musa, we don't really know much about it, but China before has said that they've been working on other alternatives to these AI chips from the United States, but they don't quite say much about it, which means they're not quite there yet. And I think they make these announcements just so to scare America off, and just so America can know that they're not sitting around and waiting for American chips. And they're also working on their AI chips that are going to help them. It doesn't seem like this one is going to be available in the market outside China. And in all likeliness, it's probably still being tested on a few products within China itself.
China's going to do the same thing. If it's got a special microchip, it's not going to let it go to the US.
Oh, definitely not. China has shown that what the U.S. can do, it can even do it more with the tit for tat that they've been playing. Because there's been in the past, it seemed like there were conversations that were going to happen, but it doesn't seem like with what Donald Trump's has been working and acting. Doesn't seem like those conversations are going to happen. But what's happened is that the CEO of NVIDIA has gone to China to meet some lawmakers, decision makers, and politicians there in defiance of what the American president has been saying they shouldn't do.
Jensen Huang, he's the CEO at NVIDIA. He's an American citizen, born in Taiwan. He goes to meet some of the top leaders in China. Presumably they had plenty to say. They've got a lot of things to do, but they are also in a position where he is a fascinating person in all of this.
Oh, yeah, and it happens a mere day after the U.S. government opened an investigation into whether NVIDIA violated rules by continuing to sell to China after they'd been told to halt those sales to China. So as America says, we're investigating if you're continuing to do what we've told you not to do. Now the head of NVIDIA goes to China to meet with the premier of China, right? To have a conversation to perhaps figure out how they can bypass what America is trying to tell them to do or trying to make them do. It's quite interesting, this defiance that seems to be going on right now.
Possibly not the last of it. Are there any alternatives to NVIDIA? I presume that we are going to start seeing people developing them.
Not really. So an alternative that does what NVIDIA does hasn't really been found in terms of the amount of data that it can and the speeds that it can process it. But it does seem like, especially in China, that there are developments that are happening. And we're probably going to have an alternative soon. But it seems like NVIDIA is trying to sort of like block that to say, listen, we are still available.
Thanks very much indeed. Siphumelele Zondi is a tech expert here on The Money Show.
The Money Show.
with Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app.
And DSTV channel 856.
Small Business Focus is brought to you by Capitec. No matter the size of your business, Capitec's got you. Well, you will know, of course, how the world is moving away from cash, but different parts of our country and different parts of our society are moving away from it at very different speeds. And there's plenty of evidence, it seems, that many businesses and townships will still be using cash, despite the fact that in some ways there should be a way to get away from it. Bolalani Balabala is a business speaker and township entrepreneur. He joins us now. Bolalani, good to see you again. Good evening. Thanks so much for coming in. I mean, this is something that really needs to change, right? Cash, I realize cash is king, but cash is also a problem.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think, and thank you so much for the platform and to all the listeners. I think I think what we've picked up over the years, and more especially over the past 3 years, especially working with some of these township entrepreneurs that are based out of the Western Cape, those townships in the Western Cape as well as in some parts of the Eastern Cape, is that in reality, the fact that they are running cash-based businesses poses a big threat from a crime perspective, primarily because in those communities, some of them are faced with having to pay some sort of protection fee, because you have someone who's sort of tallying up your stock and then watching over how much you're actually making. And as a result, the biggest challenge that you then have presiding over your business is the fact that you need to then pay someone to protect your business from themselves to a big degree. I mean, I think one of the entrepreneurs that we work with was out of can't mention the township because I think people sort of piece it together, but for their safety, out of one of the townships out in the Western Cape. And his biggest challenge when we started working with him 3 years ago was that I guess he was working, it wasn't a challenge then, but I guess it was a growth challenge, making 25,000 Rand a month. He's now gone to make 150,000. So the big challenge and problem that he now has is I can't move to your Somerset factories because of the rental cost. We need to grow the business a little bit more, but we can't brand it or have any signage up. Primarily because then it will attract the wrong type of... So I think that digitization then becomes an important thing because someone can't just snatch your money out of your hand. It creates increased visibility as well.
I mean, customers also want that. They don't want to carry cash around. They want to, pay with their watch like some young people do.
I think. In reality, we've seen a growing trend. I mean, I remember, years ago, I'm talking about 5 years ago, we got a contract with one of the major banks. And at the time, it was quite interesting that there's been an about turn. And at the time, our primary job with one of that particular company was a manufacturing company that I ran. And we installed all these signage nationwide in all township retailers. And it was interesting then that you had township retailers saying, no. If you put up the sign that we now accept digital payments, then it might reduce the number of customers that I have coming in because their wives hold on to their bank cards.
Yes. There's also, there are lots of other ways to advertise. I mean, there was a time where you had to put up a signpost. Then maybe you advertised in, can you remember those things, newspapers. Yeah. Now you can do all of that on Google.
No, definitely. And I think for me, part of digitization, is threefold. It's payments, digitization, democratizing access to your products through various payment platforms and e-commerce platforms as well. The second part of it really then speaks to online presence. And it goes without saying that the democratization of your digital tools like your various platforms, your TikTok, Instagram, and other various platforms don't just serve as a tool for you to demonstrate and showcase your product, but to a big degree, you are able to case study your products in real time, showcase who your customers are and what your customers have to say about the product. And the end result of that, it builds credibility with your product because customers are able to consume your product in real time. And I think that then has become the real disruptor in and around the space. And I think for the biggest parts is what we have then started to see on our side is that some of the ESD partners in the ecosystem that we work with, when they're now looking to verify these entrepreneurs, they're no longer just simply looking at their websites or even looking for their website. They are going towards and they're going to their Facebook platforms and other digital platforms to sort of then verify. And when you don't even have a digital platform, the question now is, are they really who they're meant to be?
I mean, you can also see if people are talking about you.
Yeah.
I mean, in the past, you had to listen in the taxi rank. Now you can do it online.
Yeah.
It makes a big difference.
No, it definitely does, man. I think, and also, I think for me, it also then talks to the fact that it gives you the agility to jump onto. I think in PR in the news community is called newsjacking.
Yeah.
But I guess in the business world, you are now able to jump onto whatever are the latest trends to the benefit of your business at almost very reduced costs of entry.
Systems are changing, and there are lots of digital systems that you can now use. You can help you keep stock and things. How important are those?
No, those are tremendously important. I think for me, it goes back to disrupt, disrupt or be disrupted. I mean, we have seen the advent of AI, and it continues through the LLMs, the large language modules, to grow and to develop and to morph itself. And I think any business owner who is operating their business outside the adoption of any digital tools, you're gonna get pushed out, and at the end of the day, I think the mindset that one should adopt is to say any digital or technological advancement should be to optimize the technical work and still relieve the entrepreneurial work, which is the creativity, business development, human contact and engagement to the entrepreneur. And I think for me, there are basic platforms. I mean, I think the last time I was here, I made an example of a young man out in the orange farm. He's got 2 donkeys on a cart, and he then delivers coal in the morning. In the afternoon, he moves rubble. But the biggest challenge that he has in that community is that he doesn't know how to navigate the roads because they're not clearly marked. And even after 30 years of democracy, the roads aren't paved. And the big challenge with that is without any street names, they can't get to the clients. So through a basic tool, which is your WhatsApp location, and then an image, is able to find his customer. And what we are basically saying to business owners is whatsoever that you are doing technically, there is a tool to optimize that particular process. The biggest thing that you need to then do is harness the power of going onto YouTube and learning, spending 20 to 30 minutes learning about that platform, and then start adopting it within your business.
I mean, some of these things are pretty easy to learn. You can learn them for free. You just need a little bit of data, and YouTube will do the rest.
I mean, definitely. I think for me, we look at, for instance, I'm making an example. I mean, we have started to adopt and utilize your platforms like your ChatGPT in the business. But what we've done is that through that, it's been an ongoing learning process internally. But we've been able to now build our own bot that is privatized from leaking out our information into the public. And I think for me, the great part is to say to every entrepreneur, small business out there, the desire to want to learn, you need to have the desire to want to learn. And then you then need to then have the second step, which is the impetus to actually go there, dedicate 30 minutes, literally 30 minutes to 20 minutes a day to learn a new platform, or 30 minutes to 20 minutes each and every day to learn that same platform each and every day, but in depth.
I mean, I do wonder if older entrepreneurs, people who've been running businesses for a while, might feel a little bit left behind by all of this.
Yeah, I definitely can. I definitely can imagine that. But then on the other side, I think of my mother, my almost 70-year-old, my 70-year-old mother who uses TikTok. And is able to utilize. And I think for me, the biggest thing to that is not to necessarily say, and I think the journey of digitization is not to exclude anyone from the journey, which is why I think in some of the processes and streams that we've brought into the various enterprise development programs that we ran, the digitization work that we do nationwide. I mean, we are in 2/3 of the country's townships, and we've worked with over 80,000 township entrepreneurs. And I think for me, we can then see the sort of morphing into this new age of doing things and working together. But I think for me, it's not just to be caught up. Similarly to, I think at some point, when the adoption or this new buzzword of 4IR came in, and all the government minister were blazers written 4IR instead of implementing the
Embarrassing. So if you're looking for funding, people want to see that you have certain systems, that you actually have something running. Your digital sort of infrastructure is part of that. I say infrastructure, you're running it on your phone, but your digital footprint is part of it too.
No, it's a big part of it. When you think about it this way, especially if you're looking, especially if anyone is going to come in as an investor, but also apart from that, let's say you are just applying for funding at DFI at a bank. If you are able to demonstrate that you are in actual fact not the business, and the business in actual fact is what it's supposed to be, its own legal domicilium that operates on its own, and you're able to demonstrate the systems that support you as a founder and your team in delivering services to your business, Now, what it does is that it lowers the risk to the perceived funder, donor, or DFI or angel investor. And I think that's the main thing that we then need to seek to democratize. It's not to remove yourself from the business, but what it is to delegate the technical work, and then you don't abdicate that, but you then become the legal fiduciary that presides over the business. And I think that's the main thing that we want to drive towards, especially with the digitization journey, because in reality, majority of our small business owners are in full-time employment where they can't even have a break. And even when they're sick, they don't have the approval or the authorization to be sick because everything is incumbent on them.
These systems, they're not that expensive, eh?
No. Because also for me, they're not that expensive because, guys, think about it this way. Let's break down what a system is and a system and a process is. A system is a way in which we do things. A process are the steps that guide us in which to do those particular things. Then the simple exercise that you need to do is measure out the physical activities that you or your management team does from Monday to Friday, from the start of the workday all the way to the end of the workday, and then start to put simple 1, 2, 3 steps or 1 to 10 steps of how to guide one on how to execute on those things, and then put them in a flow chart, a basic flow chart that says, step 1, this is what we do on Monday at 1 p.m. Step 2, this is what we do at 9 p.m. And then these are the actions that you need to then take in the delivery of that. Then the next thing that you do, take all of that information, put them onto a bot or a ChatGPT platform, and then let it help you develop your own system within minutes.
Bulelani, thanks so much. Thanks for coming in. Really appreciate it. Good
Thank
to
you
see
so much. I enjoy being here. Thank you.
Bulelani Balabala is a business speaker and township entrepreneur.
The Money Show.
Investment School.
Well, as always, when we get to investment school, at this particular point in human history, we end up talking about crisis, volatility, how to survive, how to protect your money. Doesn't even have to be investment school. We did that on personal finance this week too, now that I think about it. This week on investment school, dividends or growth? How do you build a crisis-resilient portfolio? Hlelo Giyose is the Chief Investment Officer and Principal at First Avenue Investment Management, and Gary Boyson's Director at Rand Swiss. Gentlemen, I know it's just before a long weekend, so I really appreciate the time that you've taken to come in and speak to us, and thanks very much indeed. Hlelo, let me start with you. We all know things are moving very quickly, literally from social media post to social media post. When you want to build a resilient portfolio, where do you start?
Well, you start by putting together a collection of assets that seem to have opposing qualities and characteristics.
You're about to say diversify.
Not so much diversify, because diversifying, a lot of times you could diversify assets that have the same characteristics. You just have a lot of them. Right? But you put together a portfolio that has opposing characteristics versus just different, but they have to oppose. So a really good example is that a lot of the assets you want to have for the long term have to be assets that compound earnings growth as a major driver of total returns of the wealth you create, right? So a good example, if we can go back to a stock we talked about before, companies like Clicks, like Capitec, like First Rand, those kind of companies, right? Now, you think, well, if it's so good, have more of it, but don't. Because what you need to have on the other side is an asset that actually is a hedge against any kind of problem that occurs in the world when uncertainty rises, so gold. Not necessarily gold itself. You could if you want to, but a lot of people don't have access to the metal itself. So gold equities, right? And you can see perfect days yesterday. Everything on the stock market is down but precious metals.
Yeah.
Everything. And that powered the market, I think, to an all-time high. And if you had a portfolio that had between, say, 15 and 20% in precious metals, that's how you withstand, well, I guess it buoys the portfolio from suffering significant drawdowns, if not diminution of value during moments like this.
A reminder that the Investment School is brought to you by CFI, a leading global trading platform now available in South Africa. CFI Financial is an authorized financial services provider. Gary, do you go along with that? They've got to have opposing qualities. And isn't there a cost to doing that? Because you have to put quite a lot of money into precious metals. And precious metals, they're only going to change because of market pressure. They're not going to grow and pay dividends in the way that, you know, a ShopRite or a Checkers might.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think if you look at buying a lump of gold, essentially, I think the key point is it won't compound.
Yeah.
You're literally deriving value only from scarcity and the supply and demand curve. So if everyone wants gold, sure, your portfolio is going to go up. But that is a very fickle investment as well. But I think longer term, it does have a place, and whether you're buying the gold mining stocks, which at this stage do look incredibly attractive because you've got gold prices at $3,300 an ounce, and they're all in sustaining costs across our gold miners is probably $1,600. So there's huge operating leverage in it. These companies are printing money at this gold price, so obviously they look really, really good. But I think also the point of opposing assets, absolutely buying a whole bunch of banks in a portfolio and thinking that you're diversified is dangerous. That doesn't build a crisis-proof portfolio for you. But I think it might not necessarily be having necessarily opposing assets rather than just non-correlated assets as well. So non-correlation, so instead of in correlation, you can be correlated or negatively correlated, as in when my stocks go up, this will go down. That's negatively correlated. But you can also have non-correlated, which is a correlation of zero, where my stocks go up, this might go up. My stocks go down, this might go down, but it could also go up. And it's just unrelated. And I think that's an important component of any properly diversified portfolio.
So when you say unrelated stocks, you mean something that's in supermarkets and something that's in defense?
It doesn't even have to be stocks. So typically one of the funds that we use, for example, is a private credit fund. They lend, multiple jurisdictions all over the world, and they lend short duration debt to essentially companies that can't go and raise credit themselves. And it provides an incredibly attractive yield. Typically, these are much smaller companies that they're lending money to. So they're kind of outside of the typical economic cycle. When everyone panics because tariffs have been in place and the S&P 500 is falling or tech is getting hit, this just does what it does, because these are individual businesses that have been analyzed, that have a customer base that they're servicing, and your yield stays very, very stable throughout the cycle. And essentially, it's immune from those big macroeconomic pressures that these huge companies are exposed to. You can look at many in the hedge fund world, many long short funds. It really comes down to the skill of the trader and the skill of the fund manager identifying the opportunities rather than the actual macro environment. Tides can come in and out, but that asset will perform almost independently, which is very important. And obviously to the gold point as well. I mean, gold it is seen as a hedge, but often gold is negatively correlated. When stocks go down, gold goes up. And that's maybe not the best hedge if you're looking for a pure way to, I suppose, smooth returns and risk in a portfolio.
Lelo, something interesting happened last week. So, and I'm talking specifically about the time when the Trump tariffs came in and then were paused. Which is that while we saw literally the world around us falling apart and going up and down dramatically, the JSE did swing, but not nearly as much. And isn't that a good example of a share portfolio that was properly diversified and balanced and correlated?
Yeah.
I mean, would that be a good example? If you had a stock index just across the entire JSE, because so much of it is gold and so much of it is foreign, and then a nice hefty proportion of it is South African, you're actually pretty balanced.
Well, I think because of the precious metal component of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange or Securities Exchange, it probably is the JSE probably has the highest proportion of precious metals of all stock markets. I'm not going to say in the world, but certainly of liquid and tradable.
That would make sense.
Stock markets, maybe followed by either the Toronto Stock Exchange or by the Australian Stock Exchange. But certainly that's the reason why. That's the reason why. And what's really important is if you compare apples for apples, right? Meaning that you really want both assets. I shouldn't say you really want. You may not want, but to judge whether or not an asset is providing you with protection, right? It has to be as tradable and as liquid, right? So a lot of the private equity assets that people say are non-correlated or the only reason why they don't fall in a portfolio is because they're not trading. They don't mark to market. You wait until the end of the year to see whether or not, to now do evaluation. So when you send a client a statement, the client says, I can see that X% of your portfolio didn't move. It's protecting me. You don't know. There's a surprise waiting for you perhaps at the end of the year. But with gold and precious metals, you can see on the day that it's actually doing a job different from what it's helping you out, in fact.
I've been thinking a little bit about Naspers. And the reason I've been thinking about it is that for years, if you could, this was the share on the JSE you wanted to buy. You wanted to buy, it became a big proportion of the JSE, went up in value. Now, Gary, it's so a large part of that value is because of its, it's complicated with Naspers and Prosus now, but let's just sort of stick with old-fashioned Naspers. A large part of its value is in China because of WeChat. And that's fine. But now, I can't tell you what's going to happen in China, and we may find that actually Naspers becomes part of a focal point because it's such an international company. And yes, if someone offered it to me, I'd still take it. But how do you manage that? Something that at one point was a rock-solid share. Now, there's just a little bit of creeping uncertainty about its future.
Well, it's a good question. So, how do you manage
what the money show's for?
How do you manage that? That's you need to take a portfolio approach. I think that's probably the key thing. Look at Naspers or your exposure to Tencent through Naspers in the context of your overall global portfolio. If you are stocked full of Baidu and Alibaba and all the other Chinese counters, potentially this is going to create exposure risk for you, and then sell it. You don't have to own things. Obviously, this is a very liquid security that you can get in and out of. There's lots of other instruments that you can use to kind of hedge that risk in your portfolio as well. So if you've got a big Naspers position, and a lot of people do, especially in stock portfolios, they've bought some Naspers 20 years ago. There's been absolutely stellar growth. Now we've got the Chinese markets recovering. Suddenly they're looking at their Naspers. It's becoming quite an outsized position in their overall portfolio, but they're kind of hesitant to sell it because you've got 20 years worth of growth. There's a big capital gains tax bill for you as well. And there are all sorts of instruments that you can use to mitigate that risk as well. One of them is options. You can literally buy protection against the share price falling. You can hedge it out with derivatives. You can pledge that stock to a bank and get a cash flow in return. You can put collars on it. There's all sorts of things that you can do around a big Naspers position there to protect yourself if it's becoming too much of your portfolio and you're still hesitant to sell it for, let's say, tax reasons.
When you say you can put collars on it, what do you mean?
A collar. So it's essentially an option structure that you kind of almost lock in the price, and then banks are much more willing to lend against that position because they're not taking on the equity risk that, in the scenario, China becomes a focal point of a global trade war, and suddenly something happens where this investment is devalued. They'll have protection on it.
I had an image of a Naspers logo in a tuxedo for some reason. So, Hlelo, you do need to, I realize there's a big debate between active and passive investing, but is this a moment for active investing? In other words, you need to pay a lot of attention to things. You need to move more quickly than you would normally. Is this that kind of moment?
Yes. The markets are typically not inefficient. Don't go thinking that every time you touch a stock, you purchase it or you sell it, you'll be right?
Sure.
Information dissemination is pretty commoditized now. There are very little things that you will know that people won't know. For the most part, for a long period of time, markets can become either efficient or mildly efficient. But you have moments of great global uncertainty like now, where news flow seems to move stocks by rather large percentages, up or down, right? So at this point in time, we can safely say right across the world that the markets are inefficient, meaning that share prices have disconnected from what should fundamentally drive them, right?
Right. In other words, the value of ShopRite hasn't changed.
Yes.
Its share price has because of other things.
Because of other things, right? People are thinking about the impact of tariffs on South Africa, who's going to affect them. So they're moving based on that. The truth will become evident later on. So at this point in time, he or she who picks stocks based on fundamentals, the value of it, right? And again, can create a portfolio that has uncorrelated, non-correlated, opposing assets. That person, I think, will stand in good stead over time.
We're speaking to Hlelo Giyose, the Chief Investment Officer and Principal at First Avenue Investment Management, and Gary Boyson, Director at Rand Swiss, on Investment School tonight. The latest in a continuing series of money shows looking at the impact of the Trump tariff. Do stay with us.
The Money Show.
Investment School.
The Investment School is brought to you by CFI, a leading global trading platform now available in South Africa. CFI Financial is an authorized financial services provider. Speaking to Gary Boyson from Rand Swiss and Tlelo Guyose at First Avenue Investment Management, talking, of course, about dividends or growth, building a crisis-resilient portfolio. Gary, we should talk about dividends a little bit. I mean, is this something you should be chasing in a moment like this, looking for companies that do that well?
I don't know if it's as important as many investors think it is. I think that's the way I'll approach it. So dividend companies typically are more mature companies. You know, if you look at what they call the dividend aristocrat, which means they've paid increasing dividends, generally has to be S&P 500 listed for 25 years, or a dividend king, which has paid increasing dividends for 50 years. They typically are very well-established companies. They're very defensive companies. They've seen many market cycles come and go, and they've still rewarded shareholders. And in that way, a dividend paying company is very important. But I would just caution people as well that dividends aren't everything, because on the one hand, you've got a company like Amazon, which has created enormous value, went through 2008, created enormous value, doesn't pay dividends. You know, it does share buybacks. It creates a tremendous value within the business. It has, great revenue and growing revenue. It's typically a growth company, and it's still a very solid, high quality company, even though it doesn't pay dividends. So it's not all about dividends. And then the other side of that coin as well is when stock prices fall, typically the dividend yield actually increases. So if you look at either our mining stocks, for example, when mining is getting really bad, and it's not really the case now because we've been talking about the gold miners and they've been doing exceptionally well, but often the stock price will fall and the dividend yield is based on historic dividend prices, and it doesn't take into account that many of these companies in a very difficult economic environment might cancel their dividends as well. So you might go and look on your terminal, your system, and go, "Oh, this is wonderful. Kumba's paying a 12% dividend." It's on a 12% dividend yield, but a lot of that is maybe just the stock price falling, and there's actually a forecast that Kumba might cut its dividend because the stock price has fallen because we don't expect production to be as good, and maybe that dividend isn't so secure. So I think the one thing is, if you are looking for dividend players, look for a long track record of paying dividends through crises, not just looking at dividend yield. I think that's pretty important. And also don't discount growth, because in a falling market, that's often where you find opportunity. And so often growth stocks are the ones that bounce back fastest. And it's not about how do I weather the storm today and get outperformance. It's about, in a long-term portfolio, how do I maximize return? And often that's just saying there's a storm, we're going to ride this out. We're going to see our share price values move all over the place, but in the long run, we want something that's going to deliver the best return.
The search for growth, Tlelo, where do you start to look for that in a place like this? You're looking at track records, and you're looking at how companies are going into a crisis like this.
Yeah. So, every time you step into the stock market, you really should be thinking 10 to 15 years out in your analysis, right? So just do that same exercise, by the way, in the reverse, in hindsight. Look at a company like Capitec. I think it's generated about 7,417% over the 15-year time frame, the best performing company on the stock market. 75% of that came from growing earnings. So the market has rewarded it for growing earnings, right? 75% of that 7,400. On the other side, the other opposite end of the spectrum, banks in South Africa like Capitec, like Absa, they're known for having high dividend yields. So their contribution to returns is mostly getting paid dividends or paying dividends. So it's generated about 175% versus the 7,000 of Capitec, 7,400. Of that 175%, 59% comes from dividend contribution. So you can see that growth is extremely important as you monopolize profits in the industry, meaning that you gather more and more and more of profits in the industry. And if you don't gather more and more profits, you lose profits like ABSA. All you have left is dividends, right? But at the end, as a shareholder, as an investor, 175 versus 7,400, it's pretty clear where you should have gone. You should have gone to what growth is, and as Gary says, really, it's critical not to waste a crisis like this. When there's a crisis, pick out growth.
And Gary, there would be some, for an astute investor, I realize about a sort of symmetry of, how information works, but there are moments where you can just see this thing is going to do very well and this is the moment for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So you look at it, and information does flow incredibly fast. So we were talking about NASPAS earlier, and I remember probably it was about 15 years ago, sitting on a trading desk. We had the Bloomberg screens up, and we saw Tencent's results come out, and they were terrible. And we looked at NASPAS at that stage, and it didn't move. And we were kind of confused. We were like, have we misread these results? Because that's how fast stocks move. That's how fast things price. It took about 2 minutes before the stock started to fall, and that is unusual. That has only gotten faster. So in trying to kind of read news flow and say, I heard this in the papers, therefore I must make this action. It's incredibly dangerous. And I would go to the point is you need to look at the fundamentals of the company. You need to understand the business. And if the business has a long-term track record and you understand the pressures pushing the stock down at the moment, there are enormous opportunities. And I think also the other thing is that the level of uncertainty is almost always present. It kind of rises and lowers, but buying long-term securities is always going to be scary, and it's more scary when there's a lot of noise around you as well. But history has kind of confirmed this over and over again. In a crisis, when everyone else is panicking, that is generally the best time to go and buy stocks. And like you said, if you've got, often, I mean, there's I think it's either Warren Buffett or Charlie Munger quote saying that you don't have to be particularly smart to do well in the stock market. It's far more about your temperament as well. It's not panicking. It's being able to look at something, as you say, and say, but of course this is an opportunity. Put the money in, invest in it, and sit tight and ride through it, and try and not try and have the right psychology about it.
Clelo, we've got 30 seconds left. You go along with that? It's in a moment like this, it's all about keeping your head?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's Rockefeller who said, you should buy when blood is thick on the streets. Blood is running thick on the streets.
It's quite a quote, that. Clelo Giosep, thanks very much indeed. Chief Investment Officer and Principal at First Avenue Investment Management. Gary Boyson, Director at Rand Swiss, coming in ahead of a long weekend. I really do appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed.